about how Bryce never contributed anything meaningful to the family. Judge Margaret Chen reviews their paperwork with growing interest. Bryce grips a manila envelope containing evidence that will shatter their lies completely. They have no idea their son spent 6 months gathering proof of their decades-long deception. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Broward County Circuit Court as Judge Margaret Chen called the family law proceedings to order. At 58, she had presided over countless inheritance disputes. But something about this case already felt different. Her sharp eyes surveyed the courtroom as the bailiff announced the case, Caldwell versus Caldwell, regarding disputed ownership of 3 Florida Keys properties. My stomach churned as I watched my father, Richard Caldwell, straighten his expensive navy suit jacket. At 58, he commanded attention with his pharmaceutical sales executive presence. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and those gold cufflinks caught the light as he whispered confidently to his attorney. Beside him, my mother Patricia looked equally polished in her cream-colored designer dress. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her manicured fingers clutched a leather portfolio filled with what she claimed was irrefutable proof. Their attorney, Franklin Webb, rose from his chair like a predator sensing weakness. The silver-haired Miami estate lawyer had a reputation that preceded him into every courtroom. His commanding presence and tailored suit screamed expensive legal firepower. I glanced at my own representation and felt my heart sink further. Sarah Martinez. My public defender looked barely old enough to have graduated law school. Her nervous fidgeting with her yellow legal pad betrayed her inexperience with high-stakes cases. She had been assigned to me when I could not afford private counsel, and now I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake trusting my entire future to someone who seemed overwhelmed before we even began. Webb began his presentation with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case like this. Your Honor, my clients, Richard and Patricia Caldwell, have been the rightful owners of 3 valuable Florida Keys properties for over 15 years. These properties, Sapphire Shores, Paradise Point, and Sunset Harbor, represent their life's work and investment. He gestured toward a large easel displaying stunning photographs of the oceanfront properties. Sapphire Shores gleamed white against turquoise waters, its massive windows reflecting the Caribbean sun. Paradise Point showcased a luxury fishing lodge with private boat slips and manicured tropical landscaping. Sunset Harbor's beachfront estate featured a private dock stretching into crystal-clear waters where colorful fish swam beneath the surface. These are not just houses, Your Honor. Webb continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. These are substantial assets requiring sophisticated management, significant financial resources, and responsible oversight. Properties that generate considerable rental income during peak tourist seasons. My mother, Patricia, took the witness stand with the grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Her background as a former real estate agent served her well as she spoke about property values, market trends, and management responsibilities. She painted herself as the devoted caretaker of valuable family assets. We have maintained these properties for 15 years. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying just the right amount of maternal concern. We have paid taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, hurricane repairs. We have hosted family gatherings, community events, and charitable fundraisers. These properties are woven into the fabric of our lives and our community standing. Then came the character assassination that made my blood run cold. Our son, Bryce, has always been— She paused, as if searching for diplomatic words, different. He chose to waste his education studying marine biology instead of pursuing a stable career that could contribute to society. While other parents celebrate their children's business success or professional achievements, we watched Bryce chase fish underwater for a living. The words hit me like physical blows. My father nodded solemnly from his seat, playing the role of the disappointed but loving parent. Richard took the stand next, his pharmaceutical sales training evident in his polished delivery. "We love our son, Your Honor, but love sometimes means making difficult decisions. Bryce has never shown interest in property management or financial responsibility. His modest income as a marine researcher would barely cover the insurance costs on these properties, let alone the maintenance required for oceanfront real estate." Webb presented a parade of documentation that seemed ironclad. Deeds showing continuous ownership insurance policies in my parents' names, tax records spanning 15 years, maintenance receipts, rental agreements. Every piece of paper painted the picture of responsible property owners who had earned their assets through hard work and careful stewardship. Mrs. Dorothy Hazelton, an elderly neighbor from the Keys, testified with the conviction of someone stating obvious facts. "I have known Richard and Patricia as the property owners for over a decade," she said firmly. "They have been wonderful neighbors, contributing members of our community. They host the annual Coral Reef fundraiser at Sapphire Shores, and their Christmas party at Paradise Point is a tradition everyone looks forward to." Webb's presentation painted me as an ungrateful son, harboring grandiose expectations about property I had never earned or maintained. He emphasized my modest income, my unconventional career choice, my apparent lack of interest in the family's financial affairs. According to their narrative, I was a dreamer who spent my days underwater studying coral reefs, while responsible adults managed the real world above the surface. "Your Honor," Webb concluded, "this case represents a fundamental question about property rights and family responsibility. My clients have invested their time, money, and energy into maintaining these valuable assets for 15 years. They have built relationships within the community, contributed to local charities, and demonstrated the kind of responsible stewardship these properties require." He gestured toward me with what appeared to be sympathetic concern. "While we understand that family disputes can be emotionally charged, the law must be based on facts, documentation, and evidence of actual ownership. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Richard and Patricia Caldwell are the rightful owners of these properties, and any claims to the contrary are simply unsupported by the legal record." My parents exchanged a look of quiet satisfaction as Webb returned to his seat. Patricia reached over and squeezed Richard's hand, and for a moment they appeared to be loving parents forced into an unfortunate legal battle with their misguided child. The performance was flawless, and I could see that even Judge Chen appeared impressed by the thoroughness of their case. Sarah Martinez rose unsteadily, her inexperience evident in every movement. She had warned me that we faced an uphill battle against such overwhelming documentation and professional legal representation. As I watched my parents' confident expressions, I understood that they believed they had already won, but they had no idea about the manila envelope in my hands or the 6 months of investigation that had led me to this moment. They had no idea that their perfectly crafted performance was about to crumble under the weight of truth they thought they had buried forever. The envelope felt heavy with the weight of justice waiting to be served. Sarah Martinez stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her notes on the podium. Despite her nervous energy, there was something determined in her young face that gave me hope. She might be inexperienced, but she believed in our case with the passion that only comes from witnessing real injustice. "Your Honor," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "The opposing counsel has presented an impressive collection of documents. However, documentation can be misleading when it is built upon a foundation of deception and manipulation." She held up a folder containing what appeared to be ancient legal papers. "I would like to present the original last will and testament of Theodore Caldwell dated March 15, 1995, naming his grandson Bryce as the sole beneficiary of all Florida Keys properties." Webb immediately shot to his feet, his polished demeanor showing the first crack of concern. "Objection, Your Honor. That will is outdated and superseded by subsequent legal transfers that have been properly executed and recorded. Judge Chen leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. I will allow the evidence to be presented, but the court will determine its relevance to current ownership claims. Sarah approached the bench with a reverence that seemed appropriate for handling my grandfather's final wishes. Your Honor. Theodore Caldwell was a decorated Navy veteran who served in the Pacific during the Korean War. After his military service, he built a successful boat-building business in Key Largo, using his craftsmanship skills and deep understanding of marine engineering. My chest tightened as memories of grandfather Theodore flooded back. I could see him in his workshop, his weathered hands shaping wood with the precision that comes from decades of practice. His eyes always lit up when I visited, and he would spend hours teaching me about different types of marine life, explaining how the ocean currents worked, sharing stories about his Navy days. Theodore purchased the first property, Sapphire Shores, in 1982. Sarah continued consulting her notes carefully. He built Paradise Point with his own hands in 1985 and acquired Sunset Harbor in 1988. These were not just real estate investments, they were a legacy he specifically intended to preserve for his beloved grandson. She presented photographs from the 1980s showing my grandfather working on the properties his boat-building tools spread across wooden decks, as he crafted custom features for each location. There was Theodore installing handmade shutters, building the private dock at Sunset Harbor, planting the palm trees that now towered over Paradise Point. Bryce spent every summer with his grandfather from age 8 until Theodore's death when Bryce was 21. Sarah explained. Theodore taught him about marine conservation, sustainable fishing practices, and the delicate ecosystem of the Florida Keys. These properties were meant to be Bryce's inheritance because Theodore recognized his grandson's genuine love for the ocean environment. The memories came rushing back with painful clarity. I remembered sitting on the dock at Sunset Harbor while Grandfather Theodore pointed out different species of tropical fish swimming in the clear water below. He taught me to identify manatees by their scars to recognize the difference between healthy coral and bleached reefs, to understand the complex relationships between predators and prey in marine ecosystems. You are going to be a guardian of these waters someday, buddy. He used to tell me, his calloused hand resting on my shoulder, as we watched dolphins play in the distance. These properties will be yours when you are old enough to appreciate what they really represent. Sarah presented evidence of Theodore's deep concern about his son, Richard's materialistic attitude. Personal letters revealed my grandfather's worry that Richard viewed the properties purely as financial assets rather than environmental treasures requiring protection and stewardship. Theodore Caldwell died on October 7, 2006, Sarah stated solemnly. Bryce was 21 years old, a junior at the University of Florida studying marine biology. In his grief and trust for his family, Bryce accepted his parents' explanation that the properties needed to be temporarily transferred to them for estate tax purposes. My stomach clenched as I remembered that devastating conversation. I had been struggling to focus on my studies while grieving the loss of the most important person in my life. My parents sat me down in their comfortable living room, speaking in gentle, concerned tones about complex legal matters that a college student could not be expected to understand. Theodore wanted us to handle everything until you graduate and get established in your career. My mother had said, her voice full of what seemed like maternal wisdom. Estate taxes are complicated, and these properties require immediate attention that you cannot provide while you are still in school. My father had nodded gravely, presenting official-looking documents that needed my signature. This is just temporary, son. Grandfather wanted to make sure everything was handled properly, so you would not have to worry about legal complications while you are grieving and trying to finish your education. I had signed those papers without question, trusting that my parents were protecting my inheritance just as they claimed. Sarah's voice brought me back to the present courtroom. However, 6 months ago, Bryce discovered a storage unit that had belonged to his grandfather. Inside, he found Theodore's personal papers, including the original will that specifically excluded Richard and Patricia from inheriting any Florida Keys properties. She presented a manila folder containing documents that had been hidden for 17 years. Theodore's personal notes reveal his growing concern about his son's financial irresponsibility and his daughter-in-law's materialistic attitude. These papers show that Theodore never intended for Richard and Patricia to control his legacy properties. Webb objected again, but Judge Chen overruled him, clearly interested in understanding the full scope of the inheritance dispute. Furthermore, Your Honor, Sarah continued her confidence building as she presented our case. Bryce hired private investigator Jake Morrison to examine the financial records surrounding these property transfers. A distinguished man in his 50s rose from the gallery. Jake Morrison had the bearing of someone who had spent decades solving financial crimes for law enforcement. His methodical approach to investigation had uncovered details that made my parents' deception even more devastating. Mr. Morrison discovered evidence of systematic signature forgery spanning over a decade, Sarah announced. Handwriting expert Dr. Amanda Foster has analyzed 18 separate legal documents and found clear evidence that Bryce's signature was forged on property transfers, loan applications, insurance policies, and tax documents. The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical force. Judge Chen's eyebrows raised as she studied the handwriting analysis reports. My parents maintained their composure, but I could see tension building in my father's jaw and my mother's white-knuckled grip on her leather portfolio. The investigation also revealed that Richard and Patricia used Bryce's social security number and credit information without his knowledge or permission. Sarah continued. They secured multiple loans against the properties using Bryce's identity, destroying his credit rating and preventing him from obtaining student loans for graduate school. The pieces of my troubled financial history suddenly formed a clear picture. All those loan rejections, all those credit card denials, all those times I had wondered why my financial life seemed cursed with inexplicable complications. My parents had known the truth all along, watching me struggle while they benefited from my destroyed credit. While Bryce worked 3 jobs to pay for college and graduate school, Sarah stated, her voice carrying growing indignation. Richard and Patricia were collecting over $50,000 annually in rental income from properties that legally belonged to their son. Dr. Amanda Foster, the handwriting expert, presented her analysis with scientific precision. The forged signatures were clear once you knew what to look for. Slightly different pressure patterns, inconsistent letter formations, telltale signs that someone was copying rather than naturally writing. In conclusion, Your Honor, Sarah said, gathering momentum, the evidence clearly shows that Bryce Caldwell is the rightful owner of these properties according to his grandfather's original will, and that Richard and Patricia have been systematically defrauding their own son for over a decade. Judge Chen studied the handwriting analysis exhibits with intense concentration. The confident expressions on my parents' faces had been replaced by barely controlled worry. For the first time since the proceedings began, they looked like people who might actually lose something important. Patricia whispered urgently to Webb, who was frantically taking notes and preparing what appeared to be damage control arguments. Richard stared at the evidence with the expression of someone watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The manila envelope in my hands felt heavier than ever, knowing that we had only begun to expose the depth of their betrayal. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What began as my parents' confident presentation had transformed into something much darker and more complex. Judge Chen called for a brief recess, and I watched my parents huddle with their attorney in the hallway outside the courtroom, their earlier smugness replaced by urgent whispered conversations. When court resumed, Sarah Martinez approached the bench with renewed determination. Her initial nervousness had been replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had discovered a grave injustice and was determined to expose it completely. Your Honor, she began, the handwriting analysis and financial records are only the beginning of this deception. I would like to present medical evidence that will demonstrate the true extent of the fraud committed against Theodore Caldwell and his intended heir. She gestured toward a middle-aged woman in scrubs who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. Linda Washington is a registered nurse who worked at Sunset Hospice Care, where Theodore Caldwell spent his final 3 weeks of life. Linda Washington approached the witness stand with the careful dignity of someone who had spent decades caring for the dying. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her kind eyes reflected the compassion that comes from witnessing countless family struggles during life's most difficult moments. I remember Mr. Theodore very clearly. She testified, her voice steady but emotional. He was mentally sharp until his final days despite his physical decline. He repeatedly asked to see his grandson Bryce, but his son and daughter-in-law told him that Bryce was too busy with school to visit. My heart clenched with a pain that felt fresh and raw, despite the years that had passed. I had spent those 3 weeks believing that my grandfather was sedated and unable to receive visitors. My parents had convinced me that seeing him would be too traumatic, that he would not recognize me anyway. Mr. Theodore was very distressed about this. Linda continued. He kept saying he needed to talk to Bryce about important papers about protecting his legacy. He seemed worried that something was wrong with his family situation. Sarah presented hospital visitation records showing that my parents had restricted access to Theodore's room, claiming they were protecting him from unnecessary stress. According to the documentation, they had listed themselves as his primary caretakers and decision-makers, effectively controlling who could visit during his final days. Mrs. Washington, did Theodore mention anything specific about his concerns regarding his son and daughter-in-law? Sarah asked. Yes, Linda replied firmly. He told me that Richard had been asking questions about his financial accounts and property deeds. Mr. Theodore said he was planning to change some legal documents because he did not trust Richard's intentions. He seemed to believe that his son was more interested in money than in family relationships. Sarah then called Carlos Rivera to the witness stand. Carlos was a sturdy man in his 60s with calloused hands and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades working with boats and marine equipment. His testimony would reveal an aspect of my grandfather's legacy that I had never fully understood. I worked for Theodore Caldwell at Caldwell Marine Works for 23 years. Carlos testified, his voice carrying the respect of a loyal employee discussing a beloved boss. Mr. Theodore built that business from nothing, starting with small fishing boat repairs and growing into custom yacht construction and Coast Guard contracts. Carlos explained that Caldwell Marine Works had been Theodore's pride and joy, employing 37 local families and contributing significantly to Key Largo's economy. The business specialized in environmentally responsible boat building, using sustainable materials and innovative designs that reduced marine pollution. The week that Mr. Theodore went into hospice care, Carlos continued, his voice growing heavy with emotion. Richard showed up at the shop with legal documents claiming that the business now belonged to him. He said his father had signed power of attorney papers and that he was taking over immediately. My blood ran cold as I realized the scope of my parents' deception extended far beyond the residential properties. Richard had no interest in boat building or marine conservation, Carlos explained. Within 2 weeks of Mr. Theodore's death, he sold the entire business to a development company that demolished the workshop and built a shopping center. 37 families lost their jobs, and 23 years of my life's work disappeared overnight. Sarah presented documentation showing that my parents had used a forged power of attorney to sell Caldwell Marine Works for $1.2 million just days after my grandfather's death. The money had been immediately used to pay off substantial personal debts that Richard and Patricia had accumulated through years of living beyond their means. Carlos. Sarah asked gently, what was Theodore's attitude toward environmental conservation? Everything Mr. Theodore did was about protecting the ocean, Carlos replied with conviction. He refused contracts with companies that polluted marine environments. He donated money to coral reef restoration projects. He taught local kids about sustainable fishing practices. He always said the ocean was not something you own, but something you protect for future generations. The contrast between my grandfather's values and my parents' actions was becoming devastatingly clear. While Theodore had built a business that supported local families and protected marine environments, Richard and Patricia had destroyed that legacy for immediate financial gain. Linda Washington returned to the witness stand to deliver the most shocking testimony of all. On Mr. Theodore's final day, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, he asked me to give a specific message to his grandson. He was very weak, but he was completely lucid and determined. He said to tell Bryce that the important papers were hidden in the blue tackle box and that Richard could not be trusted with the family legacy. Sarah presented Theodore's handwritten letter found in the blue tackle box 6 months ago. Judge Chen read the letter silently, her expression growing increasingly grave as she absorbed my grandfather's final words. Your Honor, this letter reveals that Theodore suspected his son of financial manipulation and was planning to change his will to ensure that Richard and Patricia could never control the family properties, Sarah explained. Theodore died before he could make those changes, but his original will stands as clear evidence of his intentions. The letter contained devastating details about my grandfather's growing awareness that Richard was intercepting his mail, monitoring his phone calls, and pressuring him to sign financial documents. Theodore had planned to remove Richard from all legal papers and establish a trust that would protect the properties from anyone who might exploit them for profit. Furthermore, Sarah announced, the medical records show that Theodore's heart medication was irregularly administered during his final week at hospice. While Richard and Patricia had claimed they were helping ensure he received proper care, the nursing staff noted several instances where his medication schedule was disrupted by family interference. The implication hung heavy in the courtroom air. Judge Chen's face reflected the horror of understanding that we might be dealing with something far worse than inheritance fraud. My parents sat frozen in their chairs, their confident facade completely shattered. Patricia's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she clutched her leather portfolio, and Richard's face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan. Their attorney, Franklin Webb, was frantically scribbling notes, clearly realizing that his clients had provided him with incomplete information about their case. Your Honor, Sarah concluded. Theodore Caldwell was a decorated veteran, successful businessman and loving grandfather who dedicated his life to environmental conservation and family legacy. His final wishes were clear. His original will was valid, and his concerns about his son's character have been proven tragically accurate. Judge Chen looked directly at my parents with an expression I had never seen before. A combination of disgust and professional determination that suggested she was witnessing something that violated her deepest sense of justice. The manila envelope in my hand seemed to pulse with the weight of even more devastating revelations still to come. Judge Chen called for a private chambers conference requesting that all attorneys accompany her to review what she termed potentially sensitive evidence. My heart pounded as I watched the legal teams file out of the courtroom, leaving my parents and me sitting in heavy silence. Patricia turned toward me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of desperation and calculation that made my skin crawl. Bryce, honey, she whispered urgently, we can still work this out as a family. Your father and I never meant for things to become so complicated. Richard nodded vigorously, his pharmaceutical sales training kicking in as he attempted damage control. Son families have disagreements about money all the time. We can sit down together and figure out a fair arrangement that works for everyone. No need to drag this through the courts and destroy our relationships. Their sudden shift to manipulation tactics confirmed what I had suspected for months. They knew exactly what they had done, and they were terrified that their carefully constructed deception was about to collapse completely. We are your parents. Patricia continued, her voice taking on the wounded tone she had perfected over years of emotional manipulation. After everything we have done for you, everything we have sacrificed, surely you can find it in your heart to be reasonable about this situation. I looked at these people who had raised me, fed me, housed me, and claimed to love me, and I felt nothing but profound sadness. They were willing to say anything, promise anything, manipulate any emotion if it would protect their stolen fortune. Where were you when Grandfather Theodore was asking for me during his final days? I asked quietly. Where was your family loyalty when he was dying alone because you convinced me I could not see him? Their expressions shifted again, this time to barely concealed anger. For just a moment, I saw the people they really were beneath their polished facades. Cold, calculating individuals who viewed family relationships as tools to be used for financial gain. 20 minutes later, the legal teams returned to the courtroom. Judge Chen's face was grim as she took her seat, and Sarah Martinez looked like someone who had just witnessed something that shook her faith in humanity. Even Franklin Webb appeared shaken, his usual confidence replaced by the demeanor of someone who had realized his clients were far worse than he had imagined. The court has reviewed additional evidence submitted by the plaintiff. Judge Chen announced, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the courtroom lean forward. This evidence raises concerns that extend far beyond property disputes into potential criminal matters. She gestured for me to approach the bench with my manila envelope. My legs felt unsteady as I walked forward, knowing that the contents of this envelope would change everything forever. Mr. Caldwell has provided audio recordings that were legally obtained and properly authenticated, Judge Chen explained. These recordings contain conversations between the defendants that reveal the scope of their deception and their intentions regarding both the properties and their son's welfare. Sarah activated a digital recorder, and suddenly my parents' voices filled the courtroom with crystal clarity. The first recording was from a family dinner I had hosted 3 months ago, hoping to discuss a reasonable settlement. What my parents did not know was that I had hidden recording devices throughout my apartment, after discovering the evidence in my grandfather's tackle box. Honestly, I cannot believe Bryce is still so naive about everything. Patricia's voice carried clearly through the speakers. After all these years, he still has no idea how much money we have made from those properties. Richard's laughter was cold and dismissive. The kid has always been too trusting for his own good. Even now, he thinks this is just a simple inheritance dispute. He has no idea about the business sale, the rental income, the loans we took out using his credit. What happens if he somehow finds out about everything? Patricia asked, her voice carrying genuine concern for the first time. He will not find out, Richard replied confidently. And even if he did, who would believe him over us? We have 15 years of documentation showing ownership. He is just a broke marine biologist with no resources to fight us. The courtroom was dead silent as these words sank in. My parents sat frozen, staring at the recording device as if it were a poisonous snake. But the recording continued, revealing conversations that were far more sinister than simple financial fraud. I have been researching accident statistics in the Florida Keys. Patricia's voice continued. Did you know that there are over 200 diving accidents in these waters every year? Many of them involve experienced divers who simply disappear and are never found. Richard's response made my blood turn to ice. Bryce spends so much time diving alone around those reefs. It would be tragic if something happened to him, but not entirely unexpected given the risks involved in marine research. We increased his life insurance policy last year without telling him, Patricia added matter-of-factly. $500,000 with us as beneficiaries, combined with the property values that would give us enough to retire comfortably in the Cayman Islands. Judge Chen's face reflected absolute horror as she listened to parents casually discussing their son's murder. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted from civil proceedings to something approaching a criminal trial. Sarah activated a second recording device. This conversation was recorded 2 weeks ago when the defendants met with Marcus Tolliver, a local boat captain with previous criminal convictions. Marcus Tolliver's gravelly voice joined the conversation. Look, accidents happen all the time out there on the reefs. Strong currents equipment failures, shark attacks. A guy could go down for a routine dive and just never come back up. How much would this type of accident cost to arrange? Richard asked with the same tone he might use to inquire about lawn care services. $25,000, Tolliver replied. Cash only, no questions asked, no loose ends. Your boy goes out for his regular research dive next month and he never comes home. Happens all the time out there. That seems reasonable, Patricia responded. When this court case is finished and we have clear title to the properties, we can arrange the accident and then sell everything immediately. No one will question grieving parents liquidating assets that hold too many painful memories. The recording revealed detailed planning for my murder, including specific dates, diving locations, and methods for disposing of evidence. They had researched my diving schedule, studied my research patterns, and identified the perfect location where a body would never be recovered from the deep ocean currents. Judge Chen stopped the recording and looked directly at my parents with disgust. The court is immediately contacting federal authorities regarding these recorded admissions of conspiracy to commit murder, as well as the inheritance, fraud, and identity theft charges already established. Franklin Webb was on his feet instantly, his expensive suit unable to hide his panic. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these allegations when I accepted this case. I request permission to withdraw as counsel immediately and recommend that my former client seek separate legal representation. 2 federal marshals entered the courtroom as if on cue. Judge Chen had clearly made arrangements during the Chambers conference to have law enforcement standing by. Richard and Patricia Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, inheritance, fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. The lead marshal announced, reading their rights as handcuffs clicked into place. My mother's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely as she realized the magnitude of their situation. This is ridiculous, she screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. He is our son. We would never hurt our own child. But the recordings spoke for themselves, revealing the cold calculation behind their loving parent performance. Richard maintained his composure better, but his face had gone ashen as he understood that his freedom, his reputation, and his stolen fortune were all about to disappear forever. As my parents were led away in handcuffs, Judge Chen turned to me with an expression of profound sympathy mixed with professional determination. Mr. Caldwell, this case will be continued pending the criminal investigation, she announced. However, based on the evidence presented today, the court is issuing a preliminary injunction, freezing all assets connected to the disputed properties until ownership can be properly established. The manila envelope that had felt so heavy in my hands was now empty, its contents having exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple inheritance disputes into the darkest corners of family betrayal. But as I watched my parents disappear through the courthouse doors, I knew that justice was finally beginning to unfold. The arrest of my parents sent shockwaves through the Key Largo community that extended far beyond anything I had anticipated. Within hours, local news crews were broadcasting footage of Richard and Patricia being led away in handcuffs and by evening the story had been picked up by national media outlets. Florida Keys, inheritance murder, plot rocks, tight-knit community, read the headlines accompanied by photographs of the beautiful properties that had become the center of such devastating family betrayal. 3 days after the arrests, I received a call that would change everything again. Agent Dana Rodriguez from the FBI Financial Crimes Division requested a meeting at the federal building in Miami. Her voice carried the professional gravity of someone who had uncovered something significant. Agent Rodriguez turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, with the focused intensity of someone who had spent years tracking financial criminals. Her office walls displayed commendations for cases involving elder fraud and veteran abuse, and I immediately understood that my family's case had fallen into the hands of someone who took these crimes personally. Mr. Caldwell. She began spreading a thick file across her desk. Your parents' arrest has opened a much larger investigation than we initially anticipated. The evidence you provided has helped us connect Richard and Patricia to a sophisticated fraud network that has been targeting elderly veterans across multiple states. She showed me photographs of other families, other victims, other stories of inheritance theft that followed patterns remarkably similar to what had happened to my grandfather. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Your father's pharmaceutical sales job gave him access to medical information about elderly patients throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, Agent Rodriguez explained. He identified military veterans with valuable properties who were experiencing health declines or family isolation. Your mother's real estate background provided the technical knowledge needed to execute complex property transfers. The investigation had uncovered a network of corrupt attorneys, notaries, and medical professionals who worked together to systematically defraud veterans and their families. They produced fake wills, forged powers of attorney, and created false medical incompetency declarations that allowed them to steal millions of dollars in veteran assets. We have identified 15 families who experienced inheritance theft using methods identical to what happened to you, Agent Rodriguez continued. In several cases, the elderly veterans died under suspicious circumstances after threatening to expose the fraud just like your grandfather. She presented photographs of Frank Garrison and William Burke, two of my grandfather's Navy buddies, who had also lost waterfront properties in the Keys through similar manipulation tactics. Both men had tried to fight the fraud, but died before they could complete legal proceedings to recover their stolen assets. Frank Garrison lost his Marathon property when your parents convinced him to sign a temporary power of attorney for medical reasons, Agent Rodriguez explained. After Frank died, the property was immediately sold to a development company for far below market value. His children received nothing. William Burke's fishing business in Islamorada was taken the same way. Your parents used forged medical documents to claim he was mentally incompetent, then sold his business and boat fleet. The money disappeared into offshore accounts that we are still trying to trace. The revelation that my grandfather's friends had suffered the same fate filled me with rage and profound sadness. These were men who had served their country with honor, who had built successful businesses and contributed to their communities only to be systematically robbed by people they trusted. Agent Rodriguez showed me evidence of the network's sophisticated operation. They had identified elderly veterans through medical records, researched their family situations to find vulnerabilities, and then approached them with offers of help or friendship that gradually evolved into financial control. Your parents were particularly effective because they appeared to be successful, respectable members of the community, she explained. Richard's pharmaceutical sales background gave him credibility when discussing medical issues, and Patricia's real estate knowledge made their property advice seem legitimate. The fraud network had stolen over $15 million in veteran assets across 4 states. They operated by building relationships with isolated elderly veterans, gaining their trust through months of friendship and support, then gradually assuming control of their financial affairs through forged documents and fraudulent legal proceedings. The most disturbing aspect of this case, Agent Rodriguez said grimly, is the evidence suggesting that several victims who threatened to expose the fraud died under suspicious circumstances. We are investigating potential murder charges related to at least 6 deaths. My grandfather, Theodore's death was now being examined as part of a pattern of elderly veterans who had discovered the fraud and died before they could take legal action. The medical records from his hospice care showed irregularities in medication administration that could have hastened his death. As if the scope of the criminal network was not overwhelming enough, Agent Rodriguez had more shocking news to share. Mr. Caldwell, our forensic accountants have discovered something that will significantly impact your case, she said, pulling out another folder. Your grandfather had financial assets that your parents were unaware of when they executed their fraud. Theodore had maintained secret bank accounts and investment portfolios that he had hidden from Richard's knowledge. These accounts contained over $2.8 million that had been growing through careful investment for nearly 30 years. Your grandfather also owned additional properties that were held in a trust managed by a Tampa law firm, Agent Rodriguez explained. These include a commercial marine research facility in Key West, a fishing fleet in Marathon, and 30 acres of protected environmental land that generates substantial income through conservation easements. The revelation that my inheritance extended far beyond the 3 residential properties was almost too much to process. Theodore had created an elaborate financial structure designed to protect his legacy from anyone who might try to exploit it for personal gain. The trust documents specifically name you as the sole beneficiary, and they include provisions that would have prevented your parents from gaining control, even if they had succeeded in their fraud. She continued, Your grandfather was more suspicious of their intentions than anyone realized. Within a week of my parents' arrest, 7 other families came forward with similar stories of inheritance theft. The media attention had encouraged other victims to contact authorities, and the FBI was building cases that could result in dozens of additional criminal charges. The Key Largo community, which had initially viewed my parents as respectable property owners, was now grappling with the realization that they had been deceived by master manipulators. Neighbors who had attended Patricia's charity fundraisers and Richard's community events were horrified to learn that the money had been stolen from military veterans and their families. Mrs. Dorothy Hazelton, the neighbor who had testified on my parents' behalf, visited me personally to apologize for her unwitting participation in their deception. They seemed like such good people, she said tearfully. They hosted beautiful parties and donated money to local charities. I had no idea that everything was built on lies and stolen money. The federal investigation expanded rapidly as more evidence emerged. International law enforcement was tracking offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, where the network had been moving stolen money. Additional arrests were made as corrupt attorneys and notaries were identified and charged. Judge Chen expedited the civil proceedings to return the fraudulently obtained properties to their rightful owners. The evidence of my parents' criminal conspiracy had eliminated any question about the legitimacy of their ownership claims. As I stood on the dock at Sunset Harbor for the first time as the legal owner, I felt a complex mixture of justice and grief. My grandfather's legacy had been restored, but the price of that restoration had been the complete destruction of my relationship with my parents, and the revelation that they had been willing to murder me for money. The properties were more beautiful than I remembered, but they were forever marked by the knowledge of what my family had been willing to do to possess them. The scope of the federal investigation continued to expand as forensic accountants uncovered financial records that revealed the true extent of my grandfather's hidden legacy. The Tampa law firm managing Theodore's secret trust contacted me with news that transformed my understanding of his final intentions. Your grandfather was far more sophisticated in his estate planning than anyone realized. explained Margaret Sullivan, the trust attorney who had been faithfully managing Theodore's assets for nearly 30 years. He suspected that Richard might attempt financial manipulation, so he created multiple layers of protection for his legacy. The trust documents revealed that Theodore had been systematically moving assets into protected accounts starting in 1993, 3 years before his death. He had liquidated stock-sold business equipment and transferred rental income into investments that Richard could never access or even discover. The Marine Research Facility in Key West generates over $400,000 annually through university partnerships and government contracts, Sullivan explained. The fishing fleet in Marathon produces steady income through sustainable charter operations, and the environmental conservation land receives substantial payments through federal protection programs. But the most extraordinary discovery was Theodore's detailed documentation of Richard's suspicious behavior. Hidden in safety deposit boxes across 3 counties, my grandfather had been collecting evidence of financial manipulation, forged signatures, and fraudulent documents for years before his death. Theodore knew that Richard was stealing from him, Sullivan revealed. These records show systematic monitoring of unauthorized account access, forged signatures on business documents, and manipulated insurance policies. Your grandfather was building a legal case against his own son. The evidence Theodore had collected corroborated everything the FBI investigation had uncovered, but it also revealed additional crimes that had occurred years before my grandfather's death. Richard had been systematically stealing from the boat building business, manipulating customer payments, and using company credit for personal expenses. Theodore planned to have Richard arrested for embezzlement, Sullivan explained. He had scheduled a meeting with prosecutors for the week after he entered hospice care. When that meeting never happened due to his death, the evidence remained hidden until now. The criminal trials proceeded rapidly as federal prosecutors built overwhelming cases against the entire fraud network. Richard and Patricia were the central figures in a conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of families and stolen millions of dollars from veterans who had served their country with honor. During Richard's trial, the full scope of his manipulation became clear. Pharmaceutical sales records showed that he had used his job to identify elderly veterans with valuable assets who were experiencing health problems or family isolation. He would approach them, offering friendship and assistance, gradually building relationships that allowed him to gain access to their financial information. Richard Caldwell was a predator who specifically targeted the most vulnerable members of our veteran community, Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh stated during closing arguments. He used his professional position, his apparent respectability, and his manipulative skills to systematically rob men and women who had sacrificed for their country. Patricia's trial revealed her role in executing the technical aspects of the fraud. Her real estate background provided the knowledge needed to manipulate property transfers, forge legal documents, and navigate the complex procedures required to steal valuable assets. Patricia Caldwell was not a passive participant in this conspiracy, Prosecutor Walsh explained. She was the architect of the document forgery operation, the planner of the property transfers, and the coordinator of the money laundering activities that allowed this network to operate across state lines. The evidence against both my parents was overwhelming. The audio recordings of their murder conspiracy, combined with the financial records showing systematic fraud and the testimony of multiple victims, made conviction inevitable. Richard was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The judge cited the scope of his crimes, the vulnerability of his victims, and the calculated nature of his deception as factors requiring the maximum sentence. Patricia received 22 years in federal prison, also without parole. Her sentence reflected her central role in the document forgery operation and her participation in the conspiracy to murder me. 18 additional defendants were convicted on related charges, dismantling the entire fraud network that had operated across 4 states for over 2 decades. Corrupt attorneys lost their licenses, notaries were criminally prosecuted, and medical professionals faced charges for their participation in fraudulent competency evaluations. The civil recovery process returned stolen properties to victim families and provided financial compensation through federal victim assistance programs. The boat-building business site in Key Largo was purchased by the community and converted into a memorial park, honoring local veterans with Theodore's name prominently displayed on a bronze plaque. For me personally, the legal victory was both satisfying and devastating. The properties that my grandfather had intended as a legacy of love and environmental stewardship were now forever associated with family betrayal and criminal conspiracy. But as I stood on the dock at Sunset Harbor reading the handwritten letter that Theodore had hidden in the blue tackle box, I understood that his final gift was not just financial assets. It was the knowledge that truth and justice could prevail even against the most sophisticated deception. Bryce. His letter read, "If you are reading this, it means that something has happened to me and that Richard has probably tried to steal your inheritance. I hope the evidence I have collected will be enough to protect what I have built for you. These properties are not just houses. They are a responsibility to protect the ocean environment that has given us so much. Use them well and remember that family is defined by love and loyalty, not by blood relationships." The legal proceedings were finally complete, but the real work of honoring my grandfather's legacy was just beginning. 2 years have passed since that devastating day in Broward County Circuit Court, and I am standing on the restored dock at Sunset Harbor, watching the sunrise paint the Florida Keys in shades of gold and coral pink. The properties that were once symbols of family betrayal have been transformed into something my grandfather Theodore would be proud of, a living memorial to environmental conservation and scientific education. The Theodore Caldwell Marine Research Foundation operates from all 3 properties, now conducting cutting-edge research on coral reef restoration, manatee protection, and climate change adaptation that affects the entire Caribbean region. Sapphire Shores has been converted into a state-of-the-art marine science education center where school groups from across Florida come to learn about ocean conservation through hands-on experience. Paradise Point now serves as the base of operations for our research vessel fleet, supporting graduate student field studies and long-term monitoring programs that track the health of coral reef ecosystems. The fishing lodge has been transformed into laboratories where scientists from around the world collaborate on projects aimed at preserving marine biodiversity. Here at Sunset Harbor, we maintain the Foundation headquarters, along with Theodore's restored boat-building workshop, which now serves as both a museum displaying his craftsmanship and an active education center where local students learn traditional marine trades alongside modern conservation techniques. The economic impact has been remarkable. The Foundation employs 47 local residents, many of them former employees of Theodore's boat-building business who lost their jobs when my parents destroyed that legacy. Carlos Rivera now serves as our operations manager, overseeing the maintenance and development of all 3 facilities with the same dedication he once brought to building boats. "Mr. Theodore would be amazed to see what you have accomplished here," Carlos told me recently as we watched a group of high school students conducting water quality tests in the crystal clear waters surrounding our dock. This is exactly what he dreamed of when he used to talk about protecting these waters for future generations. My personal life has found stability and happiness that I never thought possible during those dark months when I was fighting for my inheritance and my life. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined our research team 18 months ago as a marine conservationist specializing in coral reef restoration, and our professional partnership evolved into a romantic relationship built on shared values and genuine love. Elena understands my complicated family history without judging me for the actions of people who share my DNA, but not my character. She has helped me work through the trauma of discovering that my parents were willing to murder me for money, and she has supported my journey toward forgiveness, not for their sake, but for my own peace of mind. Family is what you build through love and shared values. She often reminds me, not what you inherit through genetics and obligation. The therapeutic work with Dr. Michael Thompson has been essential to my healing process. Learning to process the complex emotions surrounding family betrayal, rebuilding my ability to trust people, and developing healthy boundaries took months of patient work, but the results have been transformative. I have learned that my worth as a person is not determined by how others treat me, but by the choices I make and the contributions I offer to the world around me. My parents' betrayal says everything about their character, and nothing about my value as a human being. The Foundation has received national recognition for our conservation work, including a Presidential Award for Environmental Leadership that validates everything Theodore believed about protecting marine ecosystems for future generations. Standing in the Rose Garden receiving that award, I could feel my grandfather's presence and his pride in seeing his legacy finally realized. The scholarship program we established provides college funding for local students pursuing marine science careers, ensuring that Theodore's commitment to education and environmental stewardship will continue long into the future. We have already sent 12 young people to universities where they are studying marine biology, environmental engineering, and sustainable fisheries management. My parents remain in federal prison serving their sentences without possibility of parole. I have had no contact with them since their arrest, and I have no plans to change that situation. Forgiveness does not require maintaining relationships with people who have demonstrated their willingness to harm you for personal gain. Richard and Patricia have become cautionary examples in law enforcement training programs about the sophistication of elder fraud networks and the importance of protecting vulnerable veterans from financial predators. Their case has led to stronger federal legislation, protecting elderly veterans from inheritance theft, and improved coordination between medical professionals and law enforcement in identifying potential fraud. The other victims of their fraud network have recovered their stolen assets through federal victim compensation programs, and several families have established their own foundations and memorial programs honoring the veterans who were targeted by these criminals. Mrs. Dorothy Hazelton, the neighbor who unknowingly testified on my parents' behalf, has become one of our most dedicated volunteers, helping with educational programs and community outreach as her way of making amends for her unwitting participation in their deception. Judge Margaret Chen attended our foundation's second anniversary celebration, expressing her satisfaction that justice had been achieved not just through criminal prosecutions, but through the positive transformation of stolen assets into something that benefits society. This case reminded me why I became a judge, she told our gathered supporters. Justice is not just about punishment. It is about restoration, healing, and ensuring that good ultimately triumphs over evil. Sarah Martinez. My young public defender who took on a case far beyond her experience level has since been promoted to supervising attorney in the Financial Crimes Division. She credits our case with teaching her that thorough preparation and unwavering commitment to justice can overcome even the most overwhelming odds. Agent Dana Rodriguez continues her work investigating elder fraud networks, using the evidence and techniques developed during our case to help other families recover their stolen legacies. She has become a frequent speaker at veteran organizations, teaching families how to protect themselves from inheritance fraud. The blue tackle box where Theodore hid his evidence now sits in a place of honor in our Foundation Museum, a reminder that truth has power, even when it is hidden for years. Visitors often comment on how a simple fishing tackle box contained the evidence needed to bring down a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. As I watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors over the coral reefs that Theodore loved so much, I am filled with gratitude for the difficult journey that led to this moment of peace and purpose. The betrayal that could have destroyed me instead became the catalyst for building something meaningful and lasting. The pain of losing my family was real and devastating, but it taught me the difference between relatives who share your blood and family who share your values. The The research team, community supporters, and conservation partners who work alongside me every day represent the true meaning of family. People who lift each other up, support each other's dreams, and work together towards something greater than individual gain. Theodore's final letter contained a truth that I carry with me every day. Remember that family is defined by love and loyalty, not by blood relationships. The ocean does not belong to us. We belong to the ocean, and our job is to protect it for those who come after us. Every morning, when I watch the sun rise over waters that Theodore loved and protected, I am reminded that true legacy is not measured in dollars or property values, but in the positive impact we have on the world and the values we pass on to future generations. The Florida Keys Marine Research Foundation stands as proof that even the most devastating betrayal can be transformed into something beautiful and meaningful when we choose love over hatred, forgiveness over bitterness, and service over selfishness. My grandfather's legacy lives on, not just in the properties he left me, but in every coral reef we restore, every student we educate, and every family we help understand that the ocean is a treasure worth protecting for generations yet to come. Have you ever experienced a situation where you discovered that people you trusted were not who you thought they were? How did you find the strength to move forward and rebuild your life? I would love to hear your stories of overcoming betrayal and finding your own path to healing and purpose. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it when they need encouragement. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice, family relationships, and finding strength during life's most difficult challenges. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from knowing that truth and justice can prevail, even against overwhelming odds. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and for supporting the important work we do here in the Florida Keys. Remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by the love and kindness you bring to the world. Until next time, keep fighting for truth and never give up hope that justice will ultimately prevail.